always so sure they're right. These are the last words of Barbara Graham, who was streetwise, brassy, and physically striking, blessed with 1950s movie star beauty, but was no angel. A small-time hustler, criminal and prostitute who had a heroin habit and a baby to feed. She was said to be a wildcat with a tender heart and had lots of friends, most of them bad. She was driven by a myriad of desires, some of them decent, some of them not. She sinned, she stole, but she swore that she never murdered, and was dubbed by the press as Bloody Babs. In March 1953, in the company of 4 men, she participated in an ill-conceived home invasion which led to her eventual downfall. And this is her story. Born in Oakland, California, in 1923, to an unwed teenage mother, she had a difficult and miserable childhood, which may have shaped her life. Her mother was arrested and sent to a reformatory when Barbara was only 2 years old. The young child, having been abandoned by her mother, bounced from neighbours to foster homes, a convent school to orphanage, and received little education. Just after her 14th birthday, she was sent to the California Reform School for Girls in Ventura for vagrancy, the same brutal institution where her mother had been incarcerated, from where Barbara emerged with an education in crime in 1939, age 16. She tried to make a new start for herself and married Harry Kilhammer, a US Coast Guardsman, in 1940. She never made it to high school, but did enroll in a business college, trying to make a new start and lead a normal life, and soon had her first 2 children. The marriage was not a success, and by 1942 she was divorced. Kilhammer was awarded custody of their 2 sons. Barbara was married again a couple of years later, but this attempt at a more traditional lifestyle again failed. Her life continued to decline. She worked briefly as a waitress in a cocktail bar, but soon turned to prostitution to earn a living, as her mother had done before her. In another attempt to live a decent life, she worked for a while as a nurse in Nevada. After this string of failures, during World War II, she plied her trade near military bases like Oakland Army Base, Oakland Naval Supply Depot, and Alameda Naval Air Station. In 1942, she was arrested on vice charges in San Pedro. At 22, with her good looks and sex appeal, she worked for a time in San Francisco for a brothel madam named Sally Stanford. She soon became involved in gambling and illegal drug circles, cultivating a number of friends who were ex-convicts and known career criminals. She served a 5-year sentence for perjury as a false alibi witness for 2 petty criminals at the California Women's State Prison. After her stint there, she moved to Reno and obtained work in a hospital and as a waitress, but decided to move to Los Angeles and return to prostitution. By the early 1950s, Barbara had worked in bars, brothels, and gambling dens across California that included arrests for perjury, prostitution, and drugs possession. She married again in 1951, but this marriage didn't last either. She hustled for a living, she wrote bad checks, and shoplifted. She gambled and was busted for drug possession, as well as being jailed for 2 months in San Diego for lewd and disorderly conduct. Her social circle largely consisted of criminals involved in prostitution and gambling. In 1953, she met her fourth husband, bartender Henry Graham, who worked in one of her frequent haunts, and had her third child, a boy named Tommy. Around the same time, she went to work for a gambling den owner, Emmett Perkins, a small player in Los Angeles mobster Mickey Cohen's criminal operation. Although she associated with people with criminal pasts, it is not known if she realized how bad they really were. Henry Graham was addicted to drugs and known as a hardened but low-level criminal. Through him, Barbara met his friends, Jack Santo and Emmett Perkins, both with criminal records. Perkins, who was having an affair with Barbara at the time, told her about a 64-year-old widow, Mabel Monahan, a retired vaudeville performer who was said to keep a large amount of cash and valuable jewelry in her secluded home in Burbank. Her ex-son-in-law was Luther Shearer, a multimillionaire who is well known for various gambling clubs in Palm Springs and casinos in Las Vegas, and was rumored that he had links to various crime syndicates. Monahan's daughter Iris had divorced Shearer 2 years earlier and received the Burbank house in the divorce settlement. Iris had remarried and moved to New York, leaving her mother, Monahan, to reside in their former home. Monahan and Shearer had remained close friends after the divorce. One rumor that was widely circulated amongst criminals in local bars was that Shearer, due to his trust of Monahan, had left $100,000 in cash, stashed in a safe at the house. On March the 8th, 1953, Barbara met up with Perkins and 3 of his associates, Jack Santo, John True, and Baxter Shorter, who was a safecracker, in a San Fernando Valley restaurant to go over the plan. Shorter later said that he initially did not want her to participate because she was a woman, but as Perkins pointed out, it was prudent that Barbara was brought on board because Monahan would be more trusting of a woman to open the door to her home and would be a decoy. This was not the first time she'd been targeted for a robbery, and so it proved. After sunset the following day, Mabel Monahan had no doubt been spending a quiet evening when Barbara walked up the path to her Burbank home and rang the doorbell to the front door. When a cautious Monahan opened it to the young woman on her doorstep, who looked harmless enough, Barbara lied that her car had broken down and asked to use the phone. With the door open, Perkins, Santo, and True forced themselves into the house. They gagged and tied up their victim and trashed her home from top to bottom, finding nothing of value. Barbara handed a pistol to Perkins and told him to knock Monahan about, to threaten her into revealing where all the assumed riches were. After the search of the house, Santo went out to get the safecracker, Baxter Shorter, to tell him they couldn't find a safe. When Shorter got into the house, he saw Monahan on the floor of the hallway. She was bleeding profusely and moaning through a gag over her mouth. According to John True's statement, Barbara was holding a revolver. She allegedly handed it to Perkins and shouted, "Knock her out." Shorter supposedly grabbed Perkins and threw him to the floor and yelled at him, "What the hell are you doing? This isn't the way it was supposed to be." When Shorter glanced down at Mabel, she appeared to him to be choking on the gag. He was a safecracker, and he wanted no part of cold-blooded violence. He managed to get John True to cut the gag off Mabel's mouth, but she looked to be in bad shape. Barbara took the pistol herself and beat Monahan with it, leaving her unconscious and bleeding on the floor. There was total chaos in the house as the thugs ransacked it, searching for a safe that actually didn't exist and any other valuables. They were so busy that they couldn't spare a thought for the woman who lay dying on the floor. Once it sunk in that the whole plan had failed, the gang split up and left in the two cars in which they'd arrived. True, Perkins and Barbara rode in one car, Shorter and Santo in the other. Shorter told Santo that he intended to try to get help for the woman back at the house. He replied, "I don't give a damn what you do. That woman stopped breathing before we left." Shorter dropped Santo off at the meeting place, and he was warned in no uncertain terms to keep his mouth shut, or there would be dire consequences. Shorter went to the nearest gas station and found a payphone. He dialed 0, got an operator, and told her that a woman needed an ambulance at 1718 Parkside Drive. Before he could be asked any uncomfortable questions, he hung up the phone and sped off. The operator tried to dispatch an ambulance to the address she'd been given, but it didn't exist. Not in LA. Shorter had been so flustered that he'd forgotten to mention that the house was in Burbank. Monahan's body wasn't found for 2 days. Her gardener, Mitchell Truesdale, had come to do some work. When he went to the front door, he noticed that it was ajar, and that was highly unusual. He gave the door a nudge and went in. He could see that the normally neat house had been turned upside down, and the smell of death was pervasive. He found Monahan's body and saw blood splatter on the walls and floors. Her Labrador was whining at the back door. He hurried to a neighbour's house and called the police. An inquest was later held, and the verdict was that the victim's death was murder caused by person or persons unknown. The investigation into the slaying of the Burbank widow began. The group had found no safe and missed a bag in a wardrobe containing $15,000 worth of jewels. Iris, Monahan's daughter, put up a $5,000 reward for information concerning her mother's murder. The robbery attempt ended up being a completely futile effort. "Wealthy widow beaten to death in California," read one headline. On March the 26th, police arrested and questioned 5 men in connection with the murder of Monahan in an attempt to ascertain any facts that they could, which would lead them to the culprits. 3 were known associates of LA gangster Mickey Cohen, along with another man, and Shorter. All of the men knew Monahan through Sharer. They were all released due to lack of evidence. Shorter, who was rattled at the thought of being executed should the police figure out his involvement, volunteered to turn state's evidence and gave the police details of the murder and attempted robbery. He said that he had seen Perkins hit Monahan with the gun and that he was upset having witnessed the murder. Shorter didn't want the death penalty, so he turned state's evidence, but his cooperation was leaked to the papers. After he was released, Santo and Perkins abducted and shot him. Roughly 2 months later, the Los Angeles Police Department arrested Barbara, Perkins, and Santo on suspicion of killing Monahan. The case against her was circumstantial. Only True, who turned state witness, could place her at the murder scene, and there were no weapons, fingerprints, or other physical evidence linking her to the crime. Learning of Shorter's disappearance and probable death, William Upshaw, a convicted criminal, volunteered to testify before a grand jury, saying that he backed out of the plan and that he had been in the car with Barbara, Perkins, Santo, True, and Shorter the night prior to the murder, as the group conducted surveillance on Monaghan's home and ran through the robbery plans. Subsequently, John True agreed to become a state witness in exchange for immunity from prosecution. In court, he testified against Barbara, who continually protested her innocence. The press nicknamed her Bloody Babs, reflecting the public disgust for her alleged actions. As her trial approached, she had a desperate problem: no alibi. Since nothing directly linked Barbara to Monaghan's murder, police and prosecutors came up with a dubious plan and decided to trick her into admitting involvement. She accepted the offer of a 20-year-old inmate called Donna Prow to pay $25,000 to the inmate and a friend who would provide a false alibi. The inmate, however, was working to reduce her own sentence, and the so-called friend, who had claimed to have been with her at an Encino hotel during the time of the murder. He was, in fact, an undercover police officer called Sam Siriani, and all of it was a police setup. Meeting with Barbara to plan the alibi, he insisted that she admit to him that she had indeed been at the scene of the crime. The conversation was being recorded, including the forced confession. This attempt to suborn justice, plus the recorded admission that she indeed had been at the scene of Monaghan's senselessly violent murder, together with her previous perjury conviction, completely destroyed credibility in court. When questioned about her actions at the trial, she said, "Oh, have you ever been so desperate? Do you know what it means not to know what to do?" An informant had given the police the name of safecracker Baxter Shorter, who identified career criminal Emmett Perkins, Barbara's lover, ex-con Jack Santo, who incidentally was a suspect in another quadruple murder, and John True, as the gang behind the break-ins. Shorter had been arrested and given a statement that he'd acted only as the lookout, but was called into the house to help search for Monaghan's valuables. He described the scene that met him to the police. "She's beaten horribly. There is blood all over the rug and everything. As I enter the door, the victim is moaning. The woman with us bends down towards True, and he is holding the old lady's head down on the rug. The woman says, 'Go on,' and knock her out. So Perkins takes a gun out and starts hitting her on the head." At the trial, his testimony, given in exchange for immunity from prosecution, had been enough to give police the suspects that they were after. Before the police could make their charges stick, Shorter had disappeared, leaving them desperate for a new star witness before their case collapsed. They turned their attention to John True, who, in return for immunity, agreed to take the stand. In his account, he painted Barbara, not Perkins, as the killer. Under oath, he told the court he'd walked into the house to see Barbara holding Monaghan by the neck and hitting her on the head with a pistol with a savage ferocity. He testified that Barbara had put a pillowcase over Monaghan's head, and Perkins tied her hands behind her back and dragged her down the hall. The report from the pathologist said that Monaghan had died of asphyxiation, strangled by the cloth around her neck. Barbara was eventually convicted based on the flimsy account of an accomplice, and there was no physical evidence to back it up. Instead, the prosecution willfully hid the evidence that would have exposed the myriad problems with his credibility, even going so far as to lie to the jury that Baxter Shorter's statement would back up his testimony. During the trial, when the prosecution introduced the secret recordings of Barbara cobbling together the fake alibi and admitting she'd been with her co-defendants on the fatal night, her credibility was destroyed. Her defense lawyer never got a chance to cross-examine Prow, The DA's office had arranged for her to be released from jail and to leave California, safely beyond the reach of the defense. No one could find her, and the prosecution made sure of it, and that was illegal, as they hid a key witness. The defense would have prized out of her how much effort she went to get Barbara to go along with a false alibi scheme. Could that breach of ethics have made things look a lot differently to the jury? Under the murder rules, Barbara would have been guilty for any participation in the crime. But if the case had been handled in a different way, she might have avoided a death sentence. Jurors convicted Barbara, Santo, and Perkins of murder and attempted robbery, and the judge sentenced them all to death. Barbara appealed her sentence, but this was turned down. There remained significant disagreement over her level of guilt. Some believe she was innocent or only partially guilty by association. On June 2nd, 1955, Barbara was transferred to San Quentin State Prison, where the California State Gas Chamber is housed, a steel capsule painted pale green, with 2 perforated metal chairs for the condemned. Barbara maintained her innocence in the murder of Mabel Monahan right up to her death. She never expressed remorse for the victim's death. While she wasn't most people's idea of a nice girl, many believe she was framed for a crime she did not commit. Santo and Perkins were due to be executed in the afternoon, which went as planned. But there was more drama to come, as on June 3rd, she was scheduled to be executed at 10 a.m., but that was stayed by California Governor Godwin Knight until 10:45. At 10:43, Knight stayed the execution until 11:30. Barbara protested. "Why do they torture me? I was ready to go at 10 o'clock. At 11:28, she was led from her cell and strapped into the gas chamber chair and requested a blindfold so she would not have to look at the observers. "I don't want to see the people," she said. Joe Ferretti, in charge of her execution, said, "Now take a deep breath and it won't bother you." To which Barbara retorted, "How in the hell would you know?" In the Herald Express, she was called the most beautiful victim that the gas chamber will ever have claimed. Her last words were, "Good people are always so sure they're right."